very, very old friend of mine from Luxembourg, Radhika. So glad to see you after ages. Wow, super. Okay, so let's get started very quickly. This is the first episode of the series in conversation with me. So what we're going to do here, the whole idea of where this came from is we've had a series of talks on HR subjects, and we've understood what all HR folks and leaders have to say. So we thought, let's give this vibrant group, this group that wants to learn, and I've seen the excitement in every talk that I attended. So we thought, let's give back to this group a little more than what normal forums do. So we came up on this idea of inviting CXOs here, a lot from the business side. So HR gets a sneak peek into what happens on the business front as well. So we're starting this series today. We thought of this and conceptualized and came up with this in a very, very short time. So we didn't do any big bang campaigning, kept it short, sweet, and simple as always. So we're starting this series with the first CXO here as a guest here, Ashok Rangan. So I'm not going to be introducing Ashok the normal way. We all know him. His LinkedIn profile says everything about him. And anyone who has had the opportunity to interact with him knows him even more. So I'm not going to be saying anything whatsoever in terms of an introduction. What we will do is through the next 45 minutes or 1 hour, through the next, through this talk conversation, what we are going to do is I'm going to be sharing a story. This is a real story. At the end, I will reveal who the story is all about. And when I talk about incidences from this real story, I'm going to be asking Ashok his perspective on it, what he thinks about it, and what are his views, and has he done anything similar to that? And let's hear from him. So what will happen is, towards the end of this conversation, you're going to discover Ashok, right? And then we will wrap it up at the end with a lot of questions. And as usual, I would always say that no question has to go unanswered. So you will get answers to every question that you put in front of us. So let's begin. There's a time wrap. You go back to the early 1980s, 1980-81. There is a 20-year-old boy who inherits his father's manufacturing business, which is in the it's manufacturing pumps. The business is in a very bad shape, and he gets into it, and he does a lot of discovery. He learns a lot of things, how businesses function, how people function, so on and so forth. And he comes up with some amazing insights, and we are going to unravel a few of those incidences in today's episode. So the first incident is this young lad, when he takes on his business, his father's business, he discovers that the whole business is a big encyclopedia of rules. Okay, so there are rules all over the place. There is a rule book. So out of curiosity, he just throws the rule book to all his employees, and he says, come back and tell me how good it is. And they all come back and tell him, fantastic, it reads very well, it's superb. His question there is, he actually had stapled all the pages together, and all those people who claimed that they had read and understood the rules, not a single person came back telling him that actually all the pages were stapled together. So this was probably one of the earliest social experiments he did on what happens in an organization where rules rule the organization. So in his business, as he was evolving the way he works, the way he runs the organization, the way people work, he created something which was much simpler to understand, much simpler to assimilate, and definitely a whole lot simpler to put into practice. And he called that book the Survival Manual. So he kind of replaced the HR manual by a survival manual. So now coming to you, Ashok, this is a practice which most people would think it's radical. How can you run an organization, a maturing organization, or an organization which wants to be successful, turn around the business? How do you think an organization can run without having rules in place for its people? Over to you, Ashok.
Thank you, Harani, and thank you to HR Milestone for this opportunity. You know, when I hear this story, and what strikes to me is the radicalness, right? That the way the person went through to do something like this. And when I think about it, my own career, there has been quite a lot of things that I mean, now if I think about it, it seems radical. But in my own mind, it was like the way I would always approach anything. And I think I should probably quote more of a recent example, which we've been doing. Um, when I walked into organizations, and as latest as now, what I find predominantly everywhere is organizations are obsessed about top line and bottom line. And everybody, especially in India, I find that people are so number driven. It's all about how much of sales I've done, what is the volume of work I'm going to produce, what's my result. They're so result focused, and it's almost amazing, because when I first came to India and I spoke to some of my management team members, and I asked them to name the best performing project engineer, the best performing service technician, the best performing frontline manager, most of them couldn't answer that question, because they hadn't thought about business in a people perspective. So I would say, the first kind of thing that radically comes to my mind is the obsession about people that I have been able to bring in organizations that I worked. And when I talk about it, I use the word obsessed because I think that is what I really believe. So my rules of being radical has always been drive your people to get the result, not drive the result onto the people, which is what typically happens. Managers are used to drumbeating results on a day-to-day basis, and driving the brains out of people as well in getting these done. But I think end of the day, if you focus on providing, first of all, making sure the right people are into the organization, and then you support them, and what I call as a servant leadership. I often talk about this, that this is like a movie, this is like a drama, and everybody has a role. It so happens that they call me a CEO. It so happens that they call you an employee, but doesn't make you bigger than me or make me bigger than you. We are all the same boat. We just have different designations, but we all have to perform our task. And that's kind of what stands out to me as the most radical for what others have seen. But for me, it's like a natural thing. That's what I always do.
Absolutely. So you actually led me to the next incident I want to speak from this story. It's about getting the right people on board. And that's a very interesting way we typically look at hiring, right? We have job descriptions which are sort of templated from, I would say many a times, I mean, it's a confession that I'm doing on behalf of everybody, that we tend to do a lot of copy paste on job descriptions from similar organizations. We say, yeah, it's pretty much the same. And we try to find people who fit those job descriptions, right? We try to look at people who are those people who actually fit in those job descriptions, and they are the ones who come on board. But eventually, we also realize that sometimes we do make mistakes about those people coming on board. So in this story, the protagonist of my real life story, he at one point of time when his organization was going and he needed things to be put in order, he felt the need to have an HR manager. So he went around searching, he did those typical headhunting searches, he did all of that. He met many candidates. He had all those standard interviews and everything, but no one seemed to catch his eye because he was not working on a job description. He was not working on a template. He was looking for a competency for him to manage the challenges in his business. So in that journey, he came across a candidate who was actually teaching in a school which coaches students to the newly graduated students to take on life. And all that he was teaching in that school was challenge status quo. Do not accept things as it is. Ask why. So these were the kinds of things he was teaching those students. And not just that, he was, not just asking them, you would classify this as being indisciplined, right? Being rebellious and indisciplined. Not just that, he kept on telling these kids that look at history with a little bit of skepticism. Do not take everything and anything that happened for granted, or whatever you're being taught is actually what happened. Go find out. So this was the kind of person who would typically be a reject for the position of an HR manager, someone who needs to put things in order, get the company running. Eventually, he ended up as what the protagonist in my story calls as the Sultan of HR for his organization. And he was one of the key members in his battalion to make this organization change. So here, I'm just trying to understand from you, if you were to get a person on board, let's take the same role. If you have to get a CHRO on board, and you're looking at candidates, what would you look at? Competencies, qualification, background, what the resume says?
Okay, I want to also talk a little bit about my hiring philosophy as well, because it is important for many of you may like it.
Yes.
I really don't believe in stereotyping and following a template in terms of hiring. I've had the most bizarre hiring examples you can imagine. I will actually tell you quite a few, some interesting ones. I was on Facebook one day just browsing, and I saw this video of Indian School of Business posted, and they had advertisements, right? So they had a particular person talking about ISB for about 15 seconds. That's it. I was just totally impressed with that, 15 seconds on a Facebook. So I actually found, his name was there. I went and searched him on LinkedIn. I added him. And within me looking at Facebook and me on a phone call to him was like 1 hour. I was talking to him and saying that, I have my executive assistant's role. Would you be interested? Blah, blah, blah. We exchanged resumes. And he was very quick to come back and say that he would like to continue where he is now, but he wanted to help me to find someone. So he went and marketed me to his ISB peers, his WhatsApp groups. And from there, I actually got my EA. This was, through Facebook, through Facebook One Connect. I have hired people from airplanes. I've hired people from my train conversations. I've hired people from restaurant conversations. And what I'm trying to say is that good people are not looking for jobs. Good people are very well taken care of by their organizations. And they are well paid, they have given good training programs, etc., etc., etc. So you really have to go and find them. They won't be applying through Naukri.com. They will be kept very happy in existing organizations. So you got to, and how do you find them? This is how you find them. You have to be out there. You got to have what I call as a smell for talent. You got to really know, where talents are, and it could come out of anywhere. And hence why I often propagate, that it's really important to put yourself out there. You can't be a complete introvert and expect that life will just come and grab you. Life will not come and grab you. You got to be a little bit of an extrovert. So if you ask me specific CHRO example, I will take you back to Vietnam. When I was in Vietnam, so first things first, whenever I join a new role, the first role I look for is whether I have a good HR director, not the CFO. Not the CFO at all, because I strongly believe that the number 2 in the company is a CHRO, not the CFO. And my role, I see as a pseudo CHRO. As a CEO, I believe my role is a pseudo CHRO, and hence why I often look for the best CHRO. So when I joined Schindler Vietnam, it was a turnaround. It was loss-making. It had a lot of problems, and I found the HR head really hardworking, very humble, down-to-earth person, but at the level of a HR executive. Typically what you see with many HR folks, very good administrative. They do paperwork very well. They do offer letters, induction plans, and they think that is their job. Which I really don't like. In fact, I used to often tell HR people that you don't even have to do that. The operations can do that. Hiring manager can do that. You don't have to do that. Hiring manager can make an induction plan. HR doesn't have to make an induction plan. Anyways, long story short, I told that person, I'll give you 6 months, and this is my expectation. Let's see after that. If you don't deliver to my level, then I will go and find someone else. And I gave her my expectation. 1 month after that, she came to me. She said, I can't deliver your expectation. I'm far away from what you think I am. But if you want to bring someone else over me, I'm okay to be in the organization with her or him. And so it was very nice that the person themselves accepted that they can be moved down. And then I went out hunting. I met, and you would not believe this, I have interviewed the HR heads of all the top FMCGs, MNCs in Vietnam. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, all the banks, you name it, I have met them. And I was appalled. I was totally appalled at the quality of the candidates that I met. I could not believe they were paying top dollars for very average, mediocre, hubris, almost sometimes megalomaniac kind of candidates, I met. I thought I can't work with any of them, So the headhunter got tired of me. She had given me about 25, 30 candidates and I was still not happy. I had met 15 of them. I was still not happy. She said, what do you really want? I don't understand what you really want. I said, I want somebody who can change things, who can really bring a breath of fresh air, who can motivate the people, energize the team. She said, do they have to know HR? I said, not necessarily they should know HR. We will together learn HR. It's not a big deal in my view kind of thing. I'm not demeaning the theoretical part of HR. What I'm saying is theory can be taught, but a lot of other things cannot be. So she said, this is very bizarre, but my operations manager had quit us about 6 months ago. This was from a search firm, And that person had done nothing on HR. She was in marketing, she was in sales, she was in operations. And that's the person I hired. And she was magic, absolute magic. 3 years we worked together before I left from Vietnam. That's my example. So overall, in summary, I would say the learning is look for not the technical skills, look for everything else. And I used a case study method during this hiring. So I gave them a real case of Schindler Vietnam, what was the situation. And I asked her to present, if she was a CHRO, what would she do to turn the situation around? So you can use this kind of method sometimes, it will help you to judge. But most important is attitude, willingness to go above and beyond. Somebody who's happy to challenge. I have been very lucky that the HRs I hired and the HR I inherited, they're all very happy to challenge me. They don't get scared that I'm the CEO and they shouldn't. So that's the kind of people you want. You want somebody who's better than you.
Absolutely. In fact, very well said. Now, this actually brings in a fantastic perspective about how leaders should try and experiment and not stereotype. And if I actually look back in history, I'm pretty much a big experiment myself. And anyone who knows my journey knows that very well. So hats off to all those leaders who had the guts, the courage to really experiment. And I think what was common in all of them, in the story that I'm slowly revealing, and in also your methodology, Ashok, I think what's common is you were looking at what the role should deliver, what is expected of the role. You were actually looking at a very big picture of what this role should deliver. And you were really not giving much importance or hardly any importance to any of the other things that have created that person. You're actually looking at a lot beyond what qualification and experience can give. Also, perhaps that worked to an advantage, because when you're getting somebody who is not stereotyped, you're also getting in some fresh perspectives into the organization. And probably that is what has created that magic that you were talking about. So continuing with the story of our young man, as he was in building his father's business, which he inherited, at one point of time, he was seeing a lot of struggle in the organization. Things were not happening the way it should happen. The momentum was not there, and there were lots of issues, and he was trying to figure out what is the problem. And then he was reminded of this very, very famous, well-known business parable about 3 stone cutters. Many of you must have heard this very well-known parable. I think it's important and I'll state it here. So there were these 3 stone cutters who were asked to describe their jobs. The first one said, I cut stones. The second one said, I am using certain special techniques and tools to cut stones in an exceptional manner to some precision of a size. The third one said, I'm building a cathedral. And obviously, the third stone cutter was someone who was rated higher than the other two, and he was a choice. So when you're looking at your organization, this actually brings in a viewpoint that managers or leaders need to identify the third stone cutters. And how would one do that in an organization? How would you, as a business leader, what are your views in identifying the third type of stone cutters who's able to visualize the cathedral that is going to be built by the stones that he's cutting?
See, I think there are two ways to do it. One is, first of all, you may find people who already have that big picture in their mind. They're always having a strategic view. Or second one is where you have to, as a leader, make sure that you show the vision to the people as well. And something that we do very often in my organization as well is to make sure that everyone, right down to the frontline manager. So I was quite shocked when almost about a year. So we launched our 5-year vision about a year ago, about January 2019. So a year and a half. And late last year, I started receiving a lot of photos from construction sites. So every construction site, usually we are given a space to keep our tools and everything. It's like our own room. I started receiving photos from these rooms, which has our strategy drawn by in a paper and pencil by my frontline technicians and stuck on the walls, right down to what do they have to do to deliver that strategy. So that is really for me, some best practice, because if you are able to get your frontline service technician or installation person who's like a blue collar worker to understand what the company is trying to achieve and how he can contribute to that, he or she, I think that makes a big difference. So the way you identify is, first of all, you need to have people in the organization who have very good attitude, who are ready to learn, embrace themselves. So we constantly have to give people feedback. And this is something many organizations, I think, we struggle with, is giving feedback. People aren't given feedback regularly. It's like once a year, or it happens twice a year, or maybe maximum thrice a year. But I often believe that feedback must be given as often as possible. At least once a month, maybe even once a week is not a bad thing, because and that's when you really find out who are the people who are interested to really develop themselves. And then when you specifically show them the big picture, that how is their work going to contribute, and you keep reminding them again and again and again through various communication channels, then you start really finding your cathedral type stone cutters who will help you to build the cathedral, who will help you to achieve your vision. And of course, it's not just about communicating, right? Everything else has to be in place. Your execution plans, your targets, your bonuses, your incentives, everything then has to be also on plan as well. So I would say that's how I would do it. Looks like, Harini, maybe we lost you. Yeah, so I think whilst we are waiting for Harini to join, I can probably add on to that aspect I spoke about, feedback. I think most organizations, feedback can work both ways, right? One is, somebody muted Harini.
I'm back.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, continue. Feedback. You were talking about feedback.
Yeah, I was just saying that feedback works both ways. It's not just about company giving feedback. Like, I have never waited for the company to give me feedback. I used to often, every month I ask my boss, I ask my staff, tell me one thing that I can do better, tell me one thing that I'm doing well. Because most times, especially if you're in a senior position, nobody gives you feedback. Everybody's scared of giving you feedback. So I insist, and the way I tell the people is kind of an emotional blackmail. I said, if I'm your brother, you would have told me, because you would have cared for me. So if you're really concerned about me, you should be telling me something that I can improve and I can do even better. So I really sincerely request everyone to think about this, that if you're working in organizations, please ask for feedback. as often as you can. And it is not wrong. Any feedback is gold. And when you're given feedback, do not argue about it. It is what it is. You don't then start telling no, this is the reason I didn't mean this, I didn't mean that. The people giving you feedback will stop giving you feedback if you argue, and if you don't accept it, the other way around also happens. The person giving also doesn't want to give. So it's important. So when you ask me about characteristics of the person who will make the cathedral, this is also one characteristic. Somebody who wants the feedback, somebody who continuously keeps improving himself, and what I call, in my words, chasing obscene success. Somebody who is always willing to go one level above and keep succeeding and succeeding and succeeding.
Right.
So that's my.
So I wanted to end this conversation a little later with that question on what do you mean by obscene success. But anyways, you have said that right now, so thanks for that. But the one thing about feedback, which I've been really thinking for a while, is the moment you know that there is feedback and the feedback has some consequences, like we have in our typical performance appraisal process. We know that this is part of a process. And there is going to be a feedback discussion, and it is going to be linked to an outcome. And, we kind of psychologically start making up those conversations because I'm working towards the outcome, right? Suppose there's a scene where the only outcome that I know is the business goals, the organization's goals, the team's goals, and my individual's goals. Everything is aligned to the larger good, okay? And I'm doing something towards that, like the third stone cutter. I know that somebody out there is going to build a cathedral, and that is why we've been asked to cut stones. I'm really not looking at how good the stones that I cut are shaped. I'm not focusing on this task. I'm focusing on what's going to be my contribution to make that cathedral beautiful. So I think the whole idea of making feedback a process kind of shifts our focus entirely to working for the outcome of that feedback and the consequence. I think that is where a lot of damage starts happening towards what each one of us is contributing towards a larger vision. So that was a fantastic insight, that don't wait for feedback, but keep asking for it. But keep asking for it, I think, more from an idea of trying to sense if you're heading towards the larger goal of the organization. That's probably the only reason for which you ought to have feedback, and not with the consequence of whether it's going to make you earn more money, right? Those consequences are pretty much automatic, and they will fall in place.
Correct.
Wonderful. So talking about in the context of performance management, there is this usual feeling among most people, and there are so many jokes and memes and stories that go floating all over the place. People tend to put in longer hours of work just before the performance appraisal season. Okay? People want to be seen by their managers at the workplace. So you'll find a lot of people staying back, working very hard, putting in long hours of work and all of that. So in our story, when the protagonist was actually looking at all of that, he also realized that as he is struggling to get his business up and running and survive the storms and emerge according to his dreams and his vision, he also noticed that he's also putting in lot of hours of work, and 24 hours in a day is not enough for him. He went into a lot of introspection, and he discovered 4 causes. Right. So Ashok, I'll pick up each cause, and you have to tell me your own personal experience or anything that you saw. So the first cause, or it's rather a myth, the cause for a burnout is that all of us believe that effort and result are directly proportional, which means all of us believe that the number of hours we put at the workplace and the result that we deliver are directly proportional. This is a myth or a fact, and what are your views on it?
Effort doesn't mean hard work only. Also means smart work, right? Also means skill. Even a donkey works very hard. Doesn't mean that you're going to work like a donkey. You're going to think, use your brains a little bit. And you gave the example of the 3 stone cutters. I'm sure people have also heard the example of the tree cutters, right? Two guys went to cut a tree. Both of them were said that whoever cuts the tree the quickest gets the reward. One guy is cutting without thinking, another guy is sharpening his saw every 1 hour. So that's what I feel. The first thing I feel is everybody should sharpen the saw all the time. I find very common, even fresh graduates, students who join us, right to experienced people, they think it is only the job of the company to train them and to get them better and better. I think it always works both ways. And to be honest with you, all these years, I have not expected my company to send me for any formal training, send me for courses. And that's also one thing I want to add is people often want to be sent for formal courses where they get a certificate and things like that, MBAs or whatever. So you don't have to really work longer hours. You got to produce the output. And today, in fact, we introduced work from home in India when I came to India 1.5, 2 years ago, actually. Kshitij would know this very well. And at that time, there was a lot of resentment, right? Like it won't work, people will not work, they will be chilling at home. How will we trust them, etc., etc. I'm like, measure the output, don't measure the work. You give them some goals, and if they meet the goals, it's okay. If they finish in 1 hour, that's not their problem, that's your problem. That you gave them such an easy task to do. But we are, I think, especially in Asia, we are paranoid. We don't trust people.
Yeah.
I get blamed the other way around. I get blamed that I trust people too much. But I honestly feel that if I trust you and you let me down, you're not letting me down, you're letting yourself down. And that's also, in a nutshell, effort is about smart work.
Very well said. It's actually, it's all about trust. And it's interesting, isn't it? Till recently, we were all thinking that work from home is not possible. One really can't do it. But then we are all right now, we've been forced to do it. And of course, work is happening. And how is it happening? Suddenly, we as human beings realize that, yes, we can trust other human beings. And we've started trusting. So, which means trust is there, but we decided not to exercise it because we don't trust others and others don't trust, and so on and so forth. So I think it's time to break those shackles. Interestingly, trust is something which has been tested by the protagonist in my story years ago, and it is relevant even now. And that's where the whole thing is amazing. So the second cause for burnout is the introspection for why burnout happens is quantity of work is more important than quality of work. So that's another myth which we're all following, and it's very, very related to the first myth which you just busted.
Correct.
So how have you demonstrated this, and how have you as a business leader cascaded this feeling down to your team members and to all levels in your organization? How have you demonstrated that you can easily bust this myth of quantity versus quality?
See, I often believe that everybody has to look at working one level above their roles if they want to go above. A lot of people, I'm sure you've experienced this, Bharani, many times.
Yes.
People will come to you and say that, why am I not being promoted? I'm like, why should you be promoted? Sir, I'm a very good sales guy. I did the top numbers for the last 2 years. I've been rated A performer for the last 2 years, but I've not been promoted as a sales manager. And I tell them that, what is the role of a sales manager? Sir, top sales guy to main hi hu, to mujhe sales manager banna hi hai. I'm like, what's a top sales manager's profile? What is he or she should be doing? And they think I should be going and closing bigger deals. And even till today, my sales managers know this. If I hear during any of my reviews that a branch manager or a sales manager is going and closing calls, I really get so angry because that's not their job. They all, in fact, I think in Asia, we have this proud feeling, ki main jaake wo order leke aaya, sir. I'm like, I'm going to sack you first because that's not your job. Then you become a sales guy. I'm very happy to make you a sales guy.
Yeah, and pay you less.
Correct. So when you talk about quality of work, it's about doing that more than what you expected yourself. Quantity of work is nothing. I mean, I don't even know these days if people are looking at quantity of work. It's not about how many reams of paper you've filled, but have you really demonstrated one level above performance? And it reminded me, first 5 years in my company, I never asked for money because I knew that I had nothing to go and tell them of what I have done. And today I see a lot of the 23-year-olds, within 1 year, all they want is a 25 lakh pay package, 30 lakh pay package. I'm like, अरे क्या किया है आपको इतना देने के लिए? What is the औकात क्या है? What have you done? You have to show me something for me to give you back. I don't have a problem. I'll give you 1 crore, in fact. But show me what you are. What is your brand? What have you tried to do? So I think that's what it's about, the quality of work for me.
Absolutely. So here I have a person, I was doing a career progression discussion. There was a team member who said that I've been in this position for a long time and I need a promotion. So I just asked him to introspect how has his role changed over the last so many years? And then there came back a statement saying, I've been doing the same thing. Then I said, but your salary is increasing, which means if you continue doing the same thing, I'm going to keep your salary also at the same level. So if you have to really grow in the organization, your role also has to grow, for which you need to make some investments, take some more accountability of your contribution towards building
Correct.
that cathedral. And only then there could be really a step up. So promotions typically are misunderstood, by just giving designation changes, where designations are, for me, they are like sticking those price tags, bar-coded price tags on apples in a supermarket. That's it. But beyond that, there's nothing. But if you really are talking about somebody whose career is progressing and he's growing in his career, I think it's a lot beyond that. It's all about, has he started looking at stone cutting as mere stone cutting, or is he able to see the cathedral that he's building? So I think that's where it comes. The third myth that all of us, I'm hearing this from most friends in the fraternity as well as from the business side, is that things are a little uncertain at work right now. Isn't this a familiar statement? We're all saying that things are a little uncertain. I have to work a little longer and a little harder each day and straighten things out. And if you sit back and, many times I have these conversations with the son during my morning walks, which obviously have not happened in the last 2.5 months. And at those times, I actually introspect on these statements. So this one, that I have to stay back longer, work a little harder every day and straighten things out at work. Is this really doable? Is when things are uncertain, when things are not happening, and every day deciding to stay back and straighten things out, is that really going to work? Or do we have to come up with another idea of creating those evangelists who will understand the challenges in building the cathedral and work towards straightening things out? So I'm coming from the fact that a leader has to be able to roll up his sleeves in a situation when he has to step down a couple of steps, or he has to stand up and do a little more, stretch upwards to take on his role. And that should be the span of how a leader can work, isn't it? So what is your take on that? Can every individual straighten things out by staying longer at the workplace, especially when things are uncertain, and things are always uncertain?
Sure. Before I answer that, I want to talk a little bit about this position and title that you spoke about. Again, it's such I don't know if it's an India thing or an Asia thing. I have no idea. But like, for example, I have never heard the title Assistant Vice President in my life till I came to India. There is and we need to really all get above this. As you said, title changes are given only to keep the person happy mentally. And really, it changes nothing. So for all the listeners and viewers, I really want all of you to not get obsessed about titles and run behind title changes. It doesn't mean anything. You come back to this question you asked me about, what was the question?
Yeah, things are uncertain.
Yeah,
and
uncertain.
Working late is going to change everything.
Of course not. I mean, it's a continuation of what you were asking before. But let me tell you that during uncertain times, what is important is resilience and agility. You got to be able to stand up and take the punches and blows without falling down every minute, right? I mean, every day you can't keep complaining about why is life so bad, I can't go out, there's so much of problem, there's so much of virus happening, blah, blah, blah. That's not going to work. And agility is super important. Agility is about being quickly changing, adapting, and seeing what is needed to be adapted. The other day I had somebody, calling me and asking, when will we pay the incentive for a particular quarter? And yeah, we've already communicated about this, that we're going to be paying at a certain time and all that. And I was just completely wondering that this person really in this world or he's living somewhere else. People are losing jobs. People are not being paid salaries. And it was a pittance incentive. It was not even a big money. And it's not that important for that person as well. I know that. So this is what I'm talking about. Agility is about really looking ahead and seeing, okay, the company is going to be really in trouble in 6 months down the line because of revenue, drops and all that. What can I do out of my normal job profile? People can say, but I'm a sales guy. How can I go and do operations? Why not? Oh, I'm not in HR. How can I go and do recruitment? Why not? So for me, it's about really thinking out of the box and putting yourself out there. See, right now, even though I'm a CEO, I know I have gone down to talking to customers to go and sell our units. I'm recruiting all the time. I'm taking decisions on finance, everything, right? I mean, nobody tells me I have to do this. I don't go and expect only my team to do all of that. I have to also do it. So I would say people should be a little bit more open-minded.
Yeah. And I think you spoke about victim behavior. You spoke about people feeling that why me, and it's me. I am like the Atlas holding the earth on my shoulders. And if I shrug, right? So if I shrug, the organization is going to collapse, and that's a kind of burden that people seem to carry back from work, which is what actually is a problem. So if workplaces were very different. Okay, the fourth myth that we are going to burst now is when people carry such burdens, they become very possessive about these burdens, saying, I am holding the whole organization on my head. Okay, and I have to slog and work, and only then we're going to achieve whatever we're going to achieve, and all of that. And in that process, we hold on too much. And there is a fear of delegation. We have a fear of letting go. Okay. And not just fear of delegation, but there is also a fear of replaceability.
Yeah, we're going to take over.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So there's insecurity, because of which the fear of delegation becomes even a lot more. I have had a lot of personal experiences where, if I look at my entire career journey, I think one of the secret sauce of my growth has been that I always hired smarter people to report into me. Because for me, that's the best way to make myself redundant and move on to something else. And protagonist in our story absolutely kept doing the same thing. He never behaved like the CEO, like you said. He never calls himself the CEO, but absolutely brilliantly run the organization. In one of his podcast interviews with the BBC, he's been described as the company which never required a CEO. So what are your thoughts around this insecurity, the fear of delegation, and fear of replaceability? Do you have any experiences to share? Or?
I have lots of experiences. Of course, I can't name the persons and stuff. But, yes. I never could understand, because I was never like that. So I could never understand why are people being so worried about their own jobs and stuff. And every role I take, the first week I sit with my HR and I ask them, who's my successor? And they are just looking at me thinking, why are you just came, why are you already asking for your successor, Because I tell you why, right? You know very well, to get your successor ready, it takes you at least 3 to 5 years. Nothing less. And people, moment you ask them succession planning, they think that I'm going to sack them. Nothing else comes to their mind. So I don't know why people have to be feeling that way. And you rightly said, your job is to make your job redundant.
Yes. Absolutely.
Then you will move on to bigger things. Doesn't mean you will lose your job. Not only this happens, in fact, I remember this example in Malaysia. I offered one particular guy who's been in the same role for 15 years. I offered him a new role. And he said, what if I fail in the new role? Will you give me back my old job? I said, there is no guarantee for anybody's job, including mine. We're all on a month-to-month contract. The company can pay us out 1 month and say, thank you very much for your time. So people, first of all, should always be looking at hiring people smarter. There's no doubt. They should always be looking at making their jobs redundant. And if they don't move, then the people below will not move.
Absolutely.
Everybody's getting stuck the same place.
To an extent, I think it's even suicidal.
Yeah.
The stagnation is ultimately suicidal. So
I think you should not be in the same role for more than 5 years.
Absolutely.
Maximum 5, if not 3.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we are almost at 8 o'clock. So I will just quickly come up with one more incident from the story, and then we wrap it up, revealing whatever we have to reveal about this,
Sure.
this person, this individual, and then we will leave it for a discussion for about 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. Right. So the other thing is, when it comes to, now because we have an HR crowd here, I'm asking a very specific HR question. When it comes to writing down policies, all of us, when I was on the HR side of the story, it used to amuse me a lot. Why do we have to write policies in a way people cannot read and understand? Policies are so complicated in their drafts that it becomes very, very difficult to read, understand, simplify, and implement. So many times I used to jokingly ask my people that, are you guys writing this policy so that people don't understand and they come back to you asking for an explanation and you feel that you have done your job by explaining the policies to them? Why don't we simply write an intent of the policy, right? So, for example, one policy which I had was a dress code policy, and I said the dress code policy is that you have to be appropriately dressed so that you represent the correct culture of our organization to a client. That's it. I don't have to say anything else. The entire responsibility of what is appropriate and not appropriate is shifted to every single individual. And when the responsibility is shifted to that individual, he or she is going to be very sure that he does not misuse that responsibility, right? So policies can be mere guidelines of what is the expected outcome. Do they really have to be drafted in a language, first of all, a language which is very difficult to write, a language which is even more difficult to read and understand, and implementation, of course, sometimes gets so complex that the folks in the HR team also get confused as to whether this is compliant with the policy or not. So what is your take on typical HR policies, and what are the kind of policies that really make you feel good?
I'll tell you, first of all, what is important is, of course, policies has to be there and they have to be understandable. But more than that is the implementation of the policies, adherence of the policies. So we have to make sure, first of all, that it should not be more than 1 page. If it's more than 1 page, it's not a policy. Nobody will read it. It should not have all those legal jargons and things like that. It has to be very simple, down to earth. 1 page should give the message. But once we have that on board, what will be really good is if organizations can have audit systems in place to check whether these policies are being implemented. For example, onboarding. It's a perennial problem in many organizations. Very few companies can do good onboarding, I think. And that's the best experience you can give a new employee who joins your company. And then the whole first 6 months experience, the first 1 year, I would say, and holding them, giving them buddy systems, a whole lot of things every company has, welcome kits, whatever you call it. And if you have an audit system in place which makes sure that everybody is getting that, that's a really good thing to have as well. Plus, I also encourage strongly that there are survey mechanisms, so first 21-day assimilation survey, 50 days assimilation survey, 100 days assimilation survey. So first of all, policies has to be simple, 1 page, understandable. Secondly, that they have to be implemented for everyone, because there's a purpose why those policies were put in place. That's my take.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful. So coming back to so I actually will stop this conversation here, but I will just reveal to this audience whom we were talking about. And by the time, I think by this time, all of you ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls would have understood that Ashok Ramachandran is an extremely people-centric CEO, and that's the best way to describe him. he takes a lot of people-centric approaches with agility in it, so that you're able to adapt and face any situation. So that was Ashok Ramchandran for you. The story that I was talking about, the story of Ricardo Semler, the man right here that you can see in my background. The reason I had this picture here was because I wanted to reveal Ricardo Semler is a Brazilian businessman and author of the best-selling book called Maverick and 7-Day Weekend. Why this is Ricardo Semler is important now is he's extremely relevant to today's context. What he practiced way back in the early 80s when he inherited his father's manufacturing business, which was not doing well at all, and how he transformed that organization and also built the Semler empire is an amazing story itself. And believe me, it was built purely on layers of trust, where he treated adults as adults. He made an employee experience at the workplace without putting people into rigid rules and regulations, allowing them the freedom to challenge status quo and give their contribution towards building the so-called cathedral that we spoke about. So that was Ricardo Semler's story for you. And because I know that Ashok is absolutely people-centric and he believes in these practices, I thought it's very relevant that we take his perspectives on Ricardo's story. So this was Ricardo and Ashok for you guys. And now open to questions and discussions. Colin, do you want to unmute yourself and discuss about feedback and feed forward?
Yeah, hi Harini. Hi Ashok. I must say, fabulous story and brilliant to listen to both of you. I had a point actually, which was slightly earlier before the feedback point. One was, you mentioned that it's very important to drive people. It's not important to really drive people to get results, but to drive results onto people, something like that, if I remember. Now, as most organizations today across India, Inc. and you being the CEO, it's obvious that most of the boards today of companies, they when organizations sit together to actually chalk out their annual operating plan or their business plan, a number of times you see that the board actually indicates to the leadership team or the senior management team, including the CEO, that these are certain deliverables that are expected. Now, so clearly, I think that's kind of something that's put on to everyone, and then as a leadership team, you are supposed to be driving it down. So the point that I was trying to understand from you, Ashok, is that with this directive or this that comes from the board, how are you able to filter it such that you can really drive people to get results?
See, I think first of all, I like the word you use, filter. It's very important to filter. Absolutely. We should not be passing on everything that comes to us back down line. But I have seen that happen a lot of times. Most bosses just push everything down from up to the next level down without even understanding, that you've got to act as a filter. So when you have your key objectives given by the organization, I'll tell you a very simple methodology that I always use. I actually don't drive the results of the current year. I always have a long-term vision. So many years ago, I was lucky to be taught those philosophies of big, hairy, audacious goals. I'm sure you must have heard of them. BHAG. So I have always set internal goals which are more than what you would be prescribed as your budgets. So I always tell my team that we're going to drive our strategy and the budget will be done anyways. It's an outcome of driving our strategy. So the budget will always be below what I'm always having as goals for my team. So it has never been a problem. And of course, when you can't control the numbers, but you can control your efforts and what you are working on as actions. So for example, if you need to sell 5 elevators, you can't force the customer to buy the 5 elevators. But of course, you can go and give 25 quotations, which will convert into 5, tenders and results in the due course of time. So that's how I look at it.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Ashok. And there was another point that I had in Harini, if I may. This was related to feedback.
Yes, please, Colin, all yours.
Yeah. Okay. So there was another point, and I like the point on feedback that we discussed. That's interesting. It's just a perspective that I wanted to share. I've been doing appraisals with number of people, a number of my reportees year after year, and I think besides giving them feedback, it's also possibly important to talk about feed forward, which
Correct.
is how they need to do what all they need to do to be better. Going forward in the next financial year, so I think that's just a perspective I wanted to share. That feedback is really very important. But if we can convert that into feed forward, it helps really have it's more forward looking, and it helps people improve year after year. So this is just my point of view.
Totally. And feed forward is also easy for people to digest.
Absolutely.
Feedback people don't have to digest,
Absolutely. And sometimes there's.
Going back to the famous business parable, feed forward is all about opening up that vision of the cathedral. And as managers, when you become coaches and you start opening up that vision, then you're also obliged to help people develop the skills to achieve that vision. And that's what feed forward is all about. It's a lot more interesting and something to look forward to than looking back and finding out what went wrong.
Absolutely. And I personally feel sometimes people tend to get defensive when you don't go into feedback and when you go into the past. So, it's more progressive. And I just felt that that's probably a better approach for people during a discussion. And this is a time when most managers are discussing with their team members in terms of how their performance has been for the previous year. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashok. Thanks for
And Ashok, for your information, Colin is the Barack Obama of the HR fraternity. That's what I call him.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else would like to share a thought or ask a question to Ashok? Yeah, Rhythm wants to say something, but Harishji, can you unmute Rhythm? Yes.
Hello, sir. I have been following you for. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sir, I've been following you for some time on LinkedIn, and I also spoke to your executive assistant. We were communicating on LinkedIn on a lot of ideas, and I also saw your interview on Ranveer's show, Beer Biceps. So I was very inspired by your journey from SRM to Australia in Swinburne. So I'm also working in Australia at the moment, and looking at the future prospect, I was actually planning of coming back to India, but I've been faced with a lot of criticism from my friends that why do you want to come back to India after getting a permanent residency? There's no future, work life is bad, so on and so forth. But looking at just the growth perspective of a developing country compared to a developed country, in my view, I think that India has a lot more potential to grow. The delta would be higher. So what do you think, having worked in both of these countries, Australia and India, what is your perspective with regards to work life as well as the scope of work, and also in terms of future business possibilities for engineering companies like Schindler, or even I'm working with an engineering company. I'm not sure if you've heard of Usha Martin. So that's a wire rope manufacturer for elevator ropes as well as for mining crane. So for engineering companies, where do you see it?
See, I'll tell you a very simple answer. You cannot get best of everything. I have realized in my life, the best countries for living in the world don't have the best jobs.
Yeah.
And the best jobs are not in the best countries for living.
Yes.
So it's about what is the compromise you want to make and what kind of compromise you want to make. Of the 4 countries that I worked, my best assignment is right now, what I'm doing. It's like, I cannot imagine working in in a developed country with my kind of mindset. So, if you're a person who likes to go, I mean, you know the Aussie lifestyle very well. 4
Yes.
o'clock Friday, have
4 o'clock.
beer with your friends.
It's all for beer. Yeah. Yeah.
Go for a footy game.
Yeah.
Go have your, go night clubbing and all that. Of course, it's
Yeah.
great to do that. I don't think India is, I mean, of course, there is work-life balance, there's no doubt. But a lot of times when I tell my friends, they don't believe me, because I don't think it is so much difficult here. And I have been out of India for 12 years, so I think India is more fun to work, no doubt.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
because
continue.
Yeah. So because when I started working in Australia, the first time I called someone, there's a bit of difference in the way you work also. The first time I started working in Australia, I called one of my bosses, Jason, as sir. And he turned back to me and he said, I was not knighted by the Queen of England. So don't call me sir. So don't call me sir.
Indian,
but
subservient, right? We treat people like masters.
Yeah.
I have had similar examples as well.
Yeah.
And you're making a point?
So is there any huge cultural difference that you find between Australia and India, or shifting from Australia to India or India to Australia?
All this is myth. We are the most easiest people in the world to adjust anywhere. If we could live in India all these years and work in Australia, what is the problem? This is what I hate about a lot of Indians. They call me and say, Macha, how are you managing it back now? Like, what is wrong with you guys? You were born here, you were not born
Exactly.
in the Queen's Palace. So
exactly.
I think we can have this conversation privately as well. If you have specific more questions. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Rajiv Shah has a question. Harishji, can you unmute Rajiv? I would like him to voice the question.
Yeah, thank you, Harini. Thank you, Ashokji. And thank you, Harishji, for giving this opportunity. Ashokji, you mentioned in your opening statement that most of the CEOs talks about top line and bottom line most of the time. In that context, if we see, I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Yeah. So in that context, if we see, your views and experience seems to be very exceptional to us being in HR fraternity. But in that context, again, if we see, is it not exception to the rule also?
It is. I have to admit. I have been a misfit in many times. I felt myself. It is an exception. General rule is, in fact, most of the, and this is quite interesting, right? I was reading about the comparison between Yahoo and Apple. Steve Jobs and the Yahoo founders. Yahoo founders were apparently very nice people. Like, they didn't want to lay off people and all those kind of things. Whereas Steve Jobs was a very, very tough boss. Extremely tough and extremely rude, arrogant, whatever you call it.
Yeah, it's ruthless.
Ruthless. And you know which company is doing well, right? So, I don't know. History doesn't give much solace to people like me, I think. I don't know. Let's see if we can break it.
But I think here I would go back to what Ricardo said in this book, which I also mentioned, that challenge what history or the books really tell you. On the one hand, when you see people being ruthless, and we also see that the organization is doing well in terms of the volume of its business and how it's growing, there may not be a direct correlation only to that. There could be a lot of other things. So a lot of times what the books tell us is just one perspective.
Yeah.
And that kind of strikes me also very well. Now when I'm reflecting back on characters in history that I studied in school, also about a lot of these people about whom I've been reading, my perspective now is changing when I'm getting a view of a lot of other things which the books did not say or somebody else is saying. Yeah, so challenging what is historically done is probably the key to coming up with some path-breaking rules. And Ashok, I'm sure you'll agree with that.
Yeah.
You've been pretty challenging status quo types in any case.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we It's, yeah, 8:18 by my clock, and if yeah, so Akshay Joshi is raising his hand. Harishji, Akshay needs to be unmuted. Let him voice his question. We can take a couple of questions.
Hello, sir. Am I
Hi,
audible?
Akshay.
Yes, Akshay.
Yes.
Hello, sir. I am Akshay from third year mechanical, and I've connected you on my LinkedIn connection and also seen your podcast on the Ranveer show. Sir, it was amazing. My question for you is that as an engineer graduate coming during this pandemic situation, what two or three tips can you give for students like me?
You know, in fact, when I graduated 2002, we also had the September 11 happened. Twin Towers were bombed by the terrorist group and stuff, and all the graduate opportunities was all vanished. So I kind of reminded of when I was thinking of this generation students, it has reminded me of my own time as well. I think I have spoken about a lot about many of these aspects in Ranveer show as well. I think my suggestion to all of you is please think out of the box. Don't box yourself that I am a mechanical engineer. I will only do mechanical engineering work. Do whatever you can do, but don't do nothing. Don't just sit and wait for things to happen. Even the other day, I had a message on LinkedIn, that somebody was studying engineering and he's getting placement opportunities for sales roles. And his friends are saying, don't do sales. Are you out of your mind? You're an engineer. You should be doing engineering roles. So my suggestion to you is be agile. Don't block yourself. Don't box yourself. Then you will get opportunities. And doesn't matter small company, big company, small role, big role, 1 lakh annual salary, 20 lakhs, doesn't matter, If you start really obsessed about what your friends are doing, that's the biggest problem in India. We want to do what our friends are doing. Please get out of that mold. You be yourself and you'll be fine.
Yeah, Akshay wants to be unmuted once again. I think he wants to say something, and then we will take one more question from Rajesh.
So, Harini, I have a comment if I may allow to.
Yes.
After Akshay.
Yes.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Yes,
That's
Akshay. That's it. Okay.
Yes.
Shitij, if you want to say something. Shitij is muted. Can you unmute Shitij, please? Yes, Shitij.
Okay, I just want to make a comment here. I mean, I've never said this to Ash, but I thought that is the right platform to actually talk about. So I think when we talk about people's way, I have probably seen Ashok not only talking about it, but doing it. I remember the time when Ashok was supposed to come to India as a CEO. On LinkedIn, he sent me an invite. Hi, Shitij, my name is Ashok Ramchandran. I would be joining the India team. You can call me Ash. And I was for a second wondering that why a CEO is talking to me on a LinkedIn. So that's number one. Then second, we got chatting and I said, Ashok, I'm coming to Malaysia. Would you be available for some time for lunch? And when we went over there, he took time to come out, ensuring even a small thing. Like, for example, he's ensured that I sat exactly next to him. He made me feel as if I am just talking to someone like a very common man who can relate to. And the point here I'm trying to make here is when you say people's way, it's doing those small things which will make you humble, which will make you feel that you are one of them, not something basically can kind of people relate to it. So I just want to kind of make that comment is being humble to such extent makes a lot of difference down the line. And I think what I have ingrained and learned from is the humility. And I said that if a CEO can kind of reach down the level, and I think that was a fantastic example that he's set around. And that stuck with me. I never said this or mentioned this to him, but I thought it just goes with the title, leading people way. It's just making those small things differently,
Absolutely.
Just kind of make a comment over here.
Thanks, Shitij.
Ashokji, I have a request to you.
Hareshji, before we wind up, there's one question from Rajesh. Can you just unmute Rajesh if that's okay with you? And then.
Yeah, Rajesh can do it himself also.
Okay. Yeah. Rajesh, you can unmute and voice your question. Rajesh?
We give chance to Rajiv again.
Rajesh, Haresh ji, Rajesh. Yes, Rajesh, you're unmuted now.
Hey Ashok, truly enjoyed your anecdotes. You truly are a people leader. I can say that. And we really need more leaders like you. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing all your anecdotes. And you definitely have gone against the grain quite often, right? As true thought leaders do. And when you do this, I'm sure you faced resistance from the leadership teams you inherited. How did you go about kind of, overcoming that resistance?
Ashok is on mute. Hang on.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I was saying that I have always used my age to my advantage. The fact that I was always youngest in all the roles I did, I used it to my advantage. So I used to always say that I don't know everything, and we're going to learn together. I'm going to teach you certain things, and you're going to teach me certain things.
Very nice.
And how do we do this together? Number one. Number two is I've never gone in any of my roles saying that I'm the boss, and you're going to listen to me, and that's how it's going to work. So I think if I had said that when I became a general manager in Australia at 27 years old, I was the first brown-skinned person to become a general manager. And of course, the youngest, I was only 27 and everybody reporting to me was 45, 50 years old. They would have buried me. All of them were Orca Australians, like real hardcore Aussies. And when I told them that, what I'm going to learn from you, you're going to teach me whatever you're doing well. And I will also then help you to become more successful. I think then the resistance started coming out and walking the talk, So I used to initially do a lot of things myself to show them. I still remember the days when I was a branch manager. On Fridays, I will go out at 11:30, get lunch for everyone, pack lunches, come back to the office at 12:30, set up the table for them, and call everybody to the dining room, surprising them that I've bought lunch for them. And we all used to sit together and have lunch, have our banters, laughs, pulling each other's legs and stuff like that. So these are small things, We've got to remember that everybody has big egos. You have to take care of their egos. Make them feel special, make them feel important, make them feel, they're at the top of the world. And then they will be loyal to you forever.
Fantastic. Very nice. Thanks, Ashok.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ashok. Over to you, Hareshji. I think with your comments.
I was just requesting Ashokji. He has told everything in bits and pieces here and there. Can he summarize what are the expectations, straightforward expectation of CEO from HR?
I did a whole session 2 days ago on this topic,
Yeah, but you can give us
Sure.
summary points here for this.
Sure. I think I mentioned beginning of this session as well. I honestly feel CHROs are the number two if you consider CEO as a number. If there's any ranking, right? I mean, people always say CFO is number two, but I feel CHROs are number two. And I don't know, and maybe Harishji, you may know this. Do we have a lot of HR people becoming CEOs? I don't know many examples. I would love to see that. That's why I'm saying this example. I would love to see CHROs becoming CEOs in future. So my expectation for CHROs are they have to know the business very, very well. I'm extremely lucky to have one in my team in India. In fact, my HR team is like, I keep telling Shubha, why can't you run a region? Why can't you be the CEO? And she doesn't want to. So that's a different story. But that's a capability I would love in my CHROs to know the business. They should not be administrators. They should be the stethoscope of the person to know the heartbeat, whether the heart is beating fast or slow. And they should be the pseudo image of the CEO so that the organization is always kept on track. They should be confident to challenge the CEO and the management team. I have, my HR is the one who gives me a lot of advice and a lot of feedback about what I'm doing well and what I'm not doing well. After every town hall meeting, she will come and say, this was good, this was not good, you should not have said this. And that's what we need more and more and more. We need confident, strong, competent, vocal CHROs.
Thanks for bringing that up, because that reminded me of a recent podcast where I've actually called HR the stethoscope of the business, and you said exactly the same words.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. And it's actually meant to play that diagnostic role there, so that you are well aware of a symptom before it manifests itself in a much larger way.
Sure.
That's all from me for tonight. So Haresh ji, closing comments from you, and then we wrap up for the day.
So every aspect, thank you, Harini, taking this session forward. And this is first experiment what we had started doing in conversation with CEOs of the company. And Ashok ji, thank you. You have accepted our request on the first shot as usual. And thanks everyone. We'll keep connecting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Bye bye.